This is the Royal Report.
Good evening, welcome to the Royal Report. I'm Caroline DeRusso. Here's what we've got for you on the show tonight. Well, the Sussexes, they have rebranded yet again. While I've lost count on how many times they've tried this, could this time be different? Prince Harry's latest interview has made headlines across the globe. We'll tell you what he's had to say about King Charles's cancer diagnosis. And Harry reportedly has an interest in undertaking royal duties again. Esther Krakue joins us from London to give us the latest on that story. But first, the Sussex reset has landed in the form of a website refresh. Archewell is out and the Sussex Family Office is in. As you can imagine, there has been a raft of criticism about the new website, which we'll cover shortly with our panel. And while there is the need for a reset, it needs to be a reset of substance rather than just form. And while the glossy may look different, what sits underneath still seems to be a bit more of the same old. While in Canada this week, Harry had an interview. Anyway, here's what he had to say.
How did you get the news that the King was ill?
I spoke to him.
And what did you do next?
I jumped on a plane and went to go and see him as soon as I could.
How was that visit for you emotionally?
Look, I love my family.
He was also asked about his life in America.
Do you feel American?
Do I feel American? No, I don't know. I don't know how I feel.
Would you think about becoming a citizen?
I have considered it.
Yeah.
I struggle to have sympathy here. Harry finally gets to see his father after the King's cancer diagnosis, and a week later he's having a yarn about it with the media. The suggestion has also been made that Harry's willing to return to royal duties temporarily while the King has his treatment. This has also been met with criticism, and honestly, why does this even have to be ventilated in public? So, while there's a much need for a reset, it's in train, but it's clumsy and it's a bit unstrategic. One would have thought he would have discussed it with the palace, then issued a joint statement, rather than engage in a unilateral kite-flying exercise. Anyway, here we are. And there may well be an appetite to mend the rift, but it's not the what that appears to be the issue, but rather the how. Joining us now is News Corp columnist Louise Roberts and news.com.au entertainment reporter Bronte Coy. Ladies, welcome back to the show. Now, Louise, the Sussex website rebrand has landed. What's new?
Well, hi, Cara. Yes, so it's gone from Archewell to Sussex.com, which is, again, another rebrand, an effort to sort of refresh their sort of notoriety or their fame or whatever their sort of agenda is here. What I thought was interesting is that there's a massive glossy photo of them on the website itself, and they've chosen very interesting sort of royal colours, a sort of ivory on the navy background, and there's two very lengthy biographies of both of them. Harry's described as an environmental campaigner, an advocate for mental health, obviously a former veteran, military veteran, and a few other things. Meghan, of course, is described as a feminist and a champion of human rights as well. And I think the whole point here is for them, I guess, to get new commercial deals. And the criticism, of course, is by using the name Sussex, they're commercialising their royal ties, the royal family, of course, which they have shunned and criticised at every opportunity.
But Bronte, a reset is more than a rebrand, isn't it?
Yeah, look, in a lot of ways, I think we've seen this coming for a while. They've been drip-feeding bits of information for some time about this next chapter. Meghan spoke about on the red carpet at a variety event. It was mentioned even in Omid Scobie's book at the end of last year, and he's known to be quite sympathetic to the Sussexes. And he even said that, you know, they'd struggled to find their purpose initially, and there'd been a bit of a scattergun approach to their duties or their role after leaving the royal family. So, look, these rebrands, I think this is actually the fourth now since they've been married, but they are in need of a full reset. So in a lot of ways, this makes sense because it has been messy since they've branched out on their own. And it is also the case that they've been sort of drip feeding that idea that they're looking towards reconciliation, no longer looking in the rear view and looking towards, mending fences, but also just, I suppose, reuniting in a way with the royal family. There's been bits and pieces of that out and about for the last few months. So I wonder if this is part of that. You know, it's looking a little bit more royal. It's leaning back into a bit more of their their royal roots, as opposed to Archewell, which seemed a little bit more disconnected, even just in its name. So, yeah, a full reset, but something that there have been quite a few clues about recently.
And Louise, you touched on that criticism in your earlier answer. There has been plenty of it. How much of this website is in issue, and is the criticism justified?
I do think the criticism is justified because the late Queen Elizabeth made it very clear that royal titles were not to be commercialised, and when they opted out of the royal family as working royals, they weren't able to commercialise the Sussex name. But here we are, they've already got the Sussex website up and running, as it were. So I do think they have to tread very, very carefully, particularly if, as Bronte says, that somewhere down the line there is some sort of faint hope of a reconciliation with Harry's family.
Bronte, Meghan has apparently issued a statement responding to the criticism. What did she have to say?
Well, it was in kind of an obscure fashion initially, around the same time as the website was discovered. A testimonial from her popped up on the makers of the website, which is a Canadian digital agency, and it was gushing over the work they've done and particularly pointing out their attention to detail. So one has to assume that if she wants to put that out there with a name on it, that she's very happy with what has been put out, which is a pretty strong message about, the people that think that perhaps it's not been the best way to go. But also at the same time, and we've heard a bit from Harry and Meghan in the last week, they released another statement in relation to an article that was published in the UK off the back of Harry's reunion with his dad. It was a relatively mild article, but they chose to respond. It was about how they needed to stay the course on keeping quiet about the things that go on behind closed doors in the palace. And they fired back and said that they're receiving constant criticism, but they're still here, and then they won't be broken, effectively, is what it said. So we've heard a lot from them. They appear very set on this path, but obviously they're happy with the output. Meghan, at least, is very happy with the website.
Now, Louise, a report today in Vanity Fair that Meghan is apparently trying to mend her rift with Princess Catherine. It's an unnamed source, but do you think is there anything to this?
Well, I think there's more chance of hell freezing over than Kate wanting to patch things up with Meghan. I mean, what's in it for Kate, really? I mean, you could say maybe she wants the relationship between Harry and William to mend, but that's not going to be fixed by her becoming besties again with Meghan. I don't think she trusts her. I think also Meghan's problem is that she's allowed this narrative to flourish that Kate and Charles were somehow making racist comments about Archie before he was born. I mean, this is a narrative which she's never defended them on. She never said, no, they are not the ones I'm talking about. So why would Kate want to mend the bridges with her? And I also think it's interesting that this story's ended up in an American magazine, because traditionally these stories are briefed by various royal households, and there's no way that Kate and William are going to brief an American magazine to somehow warm up the case for a reconciliation between the two sisters-in-law. I mean, I just don't buy it at all. I think it's rubbish.
I think that's a very good observation, Louise. Now, Bronte, a great piece by Camilla Tomney in The Telegraph about the Sussexes and their ultimate dependence on the royal family for their relevance. This is something that we have talked about numerous times. She doesn't miss.
No, she's not really ever been a fan of the Sussexes, but here she really does take aim, and there's a couple of points that really stood out to me. I mean, she outlines the fact that in those biographies on the website, with Meghan, it talks about, two of her major projects, which both happened while she was in the royal family, which really just puts into contrast, the other column, which is what philanthropic endeavours have really taken off since they left the royal family. So that was an interesting one and really well put, actually, in the article. And the other one, of course, is the fact that it's been chosen to have the titles of their children in that. Now, we knew that they'd picked up Prince Archie and Princess Lilibet as the titles some months ago that came out. But to see it there again in print is, again, quite jarring, because all we've really heard is how difficult, what a horror show, I suppose, it was for Harry being born with that title. So the fact that they've adopted that for their kids, as is their birthright, but really just flies against what they've said about what comes with the trappings that come with that title. So yeah, it was really well put, and also echoes what Louise said at the top of the show about the criticisms about them looking to be banking in on their royal status.
Louise, have you got any additional observations to make here?
I think Camilla Tominey's piece is very good because she does skewer the hypocrisy around Meghan and Harry, in particular Meghan, standing for family values, when of course we know that she shunned her own family and certainly had more than a decent crack at her in-laws. So I think, and also the sort of whole narrative about being, with the people and understanding everyday struggles, when of course we've seen her this week in a Hermes, $6,000 padded coat, I think, at the Invictus event. So I do think there's a disconnect. She either wants to be one of the people, she wants to be seen as a very wealthy woman. You really can't be both, I don't think.
Now, Bronte, time for a bit of nostalgia and an interesting piece about Princess Margaret's daytime routine. Can you please tell us how she rolled?
Yeah, can I also say, being a royal never sounds like that much fun. This does. So there's an excerpt from a book about Princess Margaret, and it's actually resurfaced on social media because people love the itinerary of what her days looked like when she was in her 20s. So she was living at home with her mum at Clarence House, and apparently it all started with breakfast in bed. Perfect. Then it would be laying around for hours listening to the radio and reading the papers. Then she would have an hour-long bath. This was all before midday, might I mention. An hour-long bath run by her maid. Then she'd have an early afternoon cocktail and then a 4-course lunch. Now, nothing's really listed after that because I assume the 4-course lunch after the cocktail really finished it off for her. But look, if you're going to be a royal, I reckon that's the way to do it.
I feel like she made the most of that, absolutely. Now, Louise, the Queen of the British royal family was out with the Queen of British cinema this week. Can you run us through their nod to Shakespeare?
Yes, so Queen Camilla met up with her old pal Dame Judi Dench, who of course is a former Shakespearean actress as well. And it was for the event was at the Grosvenor House in Mayfair in London. Very chic event. A lot of very high-profile actors and thespians, they like to be called, in the UK. And the event was the 400th anniversary of the folio of Shakespeare's work, which is the first time all his works were put together in print. And it was just wonderful to see Camilla out there. She looked beautiful in the green velvet dress, and she was very happy to be amongst her people, as it were, because a lot of her charities have a very much of a literary and theatrical focus. She's had her own book club as well. She's an avid reader, and we know Charles is an avid reader as well. There were some nice touches. She got some beautiful Valentine's Day sweaters with hearts on them, his and her sweater. Whether they'll wear them, who knows, but it was a nice touch. And there was a massive get well card presented to her as well, signed by everyone who'd been there that night. So I really feel that even though she left at 8:30, the party probably took on a bit of at a pace, I think, once she'd left. But it was good to see her out and about and looking a bit cheery in, really very tough times for the pair of them.
Yeah, absolutely. And she did look cheery. She did look like she was holding up well, and an absolute credit to her. Bronte Coy, Louise Roberts, ladies, thank you so much for joining us. Now, coming up, reports have spread that Prince Harry's willing to undertake royal duties again. Esther Krakue joins us to give us the latest on that one. Welcome back to the show. Joining us now is writer and broadcaster Esther Krakue. Esther, Harry's in Canada at the moment. He's done an interview with Good Morning America. What did he have to say, and was it really wise for him to do it, do you think?
So Harry gave the interview to Will Reeve with Good Morning America to advertise the sort of 1 year coming up of the Invictus Games, which will be held next year. Now, obviously, we couldn't avoid the topic, or certainly he couldn't, about King Charles. He obviously flew over the moment he found out about King Charles's cancer diagnosis. And so Will did ask him, what is going on. Thankfully, Harry didn't reveal anything about the King's condition. I'm pretty sure the palace and most of Britain were holding on with bated breath, hoping Harry doesn't revert to his usual blabbermouth antics and just reveal all like he did in Spare. Thankfully, he said, obviously he's not at liberty to talk about that. And then he did say, Will asked him whether illnesses can bring families together and whether it's something that could happen in this case. And Harry said, yes, that is certainly possible. Now, I don't know what grass Harry has been smoking to think that his scorched earth tactic with the release of his book Spare and the Netflix series and the Oprah interview somehow in any way, shape or form will still leave an avenue open for him to go back to the royal family in any significant measure. We know that, you know, William and Harry are still not on speaking terms. I suspect his stepmother is probably not very keen on him either, given the things he wrote about her in his book. So for him to say that, you know, it is possible that King Charles's illness will bring the family together, either he's extremely deluded or he's under the influence of some substance, because for most people, they don't think that's a possibility. And I mean, I spoke to my father about this actually, and you know, people will say he's a traditional West African man, but he was like, if you did what Harry's done to me, I would probably disown you. And King Charles famously did tell William and Harry at Prince Philip's funeral to not make the last few years of his life a misery, and Harry still has. So I really don't understand kind of on what basis he thinks that he has a way of reconciling with his family.
That takes me to my next point. You know, this idea has since been floated about him returning to royal duties temporarily while the king is out of action. That hasn't been too well received, has it?
It hasn't been, and it's highly, highly unlikely. I mean, alongside probably, you know, Prince Andrew's and a long list of deplorables in the past, Prince Harry is probably one of the most disliked men in Britain. He's still technically a councillor of state, but since he's not an active working royal alongside Prince Andrew, he will not be called up to take on any duties. And this is something that the palace has probably made clear, that it would be very unlikely, especially given the influence that William will have. William will inherit his father's role. I suspect he feels a sense of duty to actually just keeping the royal family and the monarchy in a place that's not just, you know, just a gossip fest, basically. And so I think that the royal family knows that it wouldn't go down too well with the British public. They're not tone deaf. I mean, that's one of the reasons why the institution has survived for as long as it has. You know, public opinion does matter. But it doesn't surprise me that there are these allegations that Prince Harry would be happy to step in. You have to remember when he and Meghan decided to step back from being active members of the royal family, they actually wanted to have sort of a hybrid working model. So have a life in North America where they could have some sort of privacy, but also undertake duties on behalf of the monarch as and when they could. And this was a proposal that was firmly rejected. You know, you can't have one foot in and one foot out. And so in many ways they felt forced out. So I'm not surprised that that's an idea that Prince Harry would be completely against. But at the end of the day, you know, the status quo has calcified. There's too much that has happened. Prince Harry will not be received well, and neither will his wife, who I'm assuming most people probably liken her to Yoko Ono in many ways. So it's not something that would happen, absolutely not. And Prince William would certainly not let it happen.
Now, Esther, we understand that while Harry is in Canada, he's meeting with First Nations people about the Crown's commitment to Indigenous people. Look, I appreciate the sentiment, but is it really appropriate?
It's not really appropriate because it depends on what the capacity with which he's going and having this meeting with the Indigenous people for. I mean, one of the things he did say was that politicians have not taken the plight of Indigenous people as seriously. They keep promising that they will, but they haven't. The question is, what is Prince Harry, planning on doing about that? We know that King Charles has been very vocal and apologetic about the past discrimination and abuse that Indigenous people have faced. You know, there have been instances where their children have been removed from their communities forcibly, and you know, there have been documented abuses by the churches that they've been forced to join. So it's a very serious issue, and it's something that's dear to the king's heart. Now the question is, why is Harry treading down this path? And it's because it's something that, you know, he feels the need to feel like he's doing good, he's making an impact. I think one of the things that was quite telling about his interview with Will Reeve and Good Morning Britain, and I don't think that's something that people have really picked up on, is when he was interviewing, he was saying that the Invictus Games and what he feels like he's doing is his fix. It gives him a sense of duty and purpose, and you really have to kind of draw parallels between that and what he's now trying to do by meeting the Indigenous peoples, and what it means and what it signifies, particularly given his past as someone who was an active member of the royal family. He had a lot of really significant patronages and charitable concerns, and that status that being being in the royal family has afforded him is now gone. But he feels this void that he has to do something that he thinks is for the public good and for the public benefit. So it's effectively his fix in a way. It's like, you know, a drug addict that's addicted to doing good, but he's kind of lost his way a bit because he's no longer part of the institution that facilitated that kind of influence anymore. I don't think it's particularly appropriate. But again, this is someone who's effectively a rogue royal. He can do what he wants. And him and Meghan are on like the third or fourth rebrand. They're still trying to figure things out. I'm sure they're aware that mistakes have been made. So this is just his way of doing it. The problem comes when, you know, there's really kind of no finesse or decorum behind it. Meeting a prime minister who is clearly a Republican prime minister who's trying to get his country to exit the Commonwealth, and now he's meeting indigenous peoples and harking on about something that King Charles has been very clear about. You really have to wonder what his angle is, but actually he's like he said, he's trying to get his fix.
Now, Meghan has also announced a new project this week, another podcast. What is she embarking on and how is it different from what she's done before?
So we know that Meghan's podcast with Spotify, their $20 million contract was cancelled after one season of Archetypes, apparently because it didn't meet certain production standards. But I'm also suspecting that Spotify were cognizant of the fact that her star had sort of waned a little bit. Now she's signed with a new deal with Lemonada, which produces, which is a female-owned company, which produces the podcast of the likes of Sarah Silverman. She's very excited about this. She clearly wants to kind of go down the podcast route. But again, you do have to question whether this will be a success, at least as they're hoping for, what even their definition of success is. Meghan's podcast didn't particularly get rave reviews, and it's quite strange because if you think about it, she's like the darling of Western feminism. But there were actually many critics that criticized her podcast and her attitude towards feminism, and said it was mainly centered on herself and her own experiences and how she felt good doing what she was doing, and it wasn't actually linked to the plight of women, certainly in the West, but not around the world either. So you have to wonder kind of what her angle is. I always suspected that, you know, her leaving the royal family was probably for the best because she now has the freedom to explore these sorts of things. But whether it'll be a success is different. I think it's actually quite telling that Spotify cancelled the whole deal with her. I mean, if you can't really sell yourself, which is effectively your only unique selling point, what really do you have to sell? I mean, they're moving into production and trying to create content, but you know, as anyone will tell you, Hollywood and the business of content creation is a brutal game. They're not going to have the same kid gloves that they had really in the royal family, where they have this machine of the firm that can massage their public image. Anything they put out will be scrutinized. Anything they do will be scrutinized, and they don't have that cushion of the royal family to fall back on. And I suspect it's going to be the same with this podcast.
Esther Krakue, as always, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Now, before we go, let's delve briefly into the intricacies of heraldry. Now, one keen royal watcher has observed that the coat of arms used on the New Sussex website ought not to have been used. First, the Sussexes shouldn't have displayed any arms at all, since they were firmly told that they were not to exploit their royal connections in promoting their new lives. Second, it's Meghan's coat of arms rather than the one belonging to the royal couple. And third, it's out of date because it was issued when the Queen was still the reigning monarch and doesn't reflect the proximity of the relationship of the Sussexes to the current sovereign. They may be minor details, but they do matter. And that's the show for tonight. Thank you for joining us. Up next is Newsnight. Good night, and we'll see you next week.